All right, first, hello and welcome, Bob Marley. Always a pleasure to have you here. You and well, this is my second stream back after fairly long hiatus, 5 or 6 months. I think almost exactly 5 months and 3 weeks. I think technically, I looked like my last stream, well before last week, technically October 1st. So April 1st. Tomorrow. 6 months. But I'm trying to make a comeback and return to a regular, or at least semi-regular. And I went through pretty much some life updates, largely life updates last stream, and now hopefully back in science and research that I typically cover. And yeah, well, if you Great East. I had a family gathering yesterday. Always enjoyable. Even though I don't think we really not a religious family. Obviously, we celebrate the cultural holidays. And yeah, pretty much what I've been up to, as I mentioned last stream, is largely focused pretty much how far I can cultivate that. And so far, it seems going pretty reasonably well, or at least at the very least, it's paying off. As opposed to job search. I was burned by that one company and tried to search a little bit afterwards, but it was holidays, not optimal prime hiring time, so limited success there. And again, pretty jaded by the fact companies with pretty much outright lying to you, or pretty much not treating you all that well. Not exactly like a human being, which I don't particularly appreciate. And so, pretty much, got into tutoring, and so far seems to be out. Great question, Bob Marley. Fantastic question. On that note, I probably have to update my channel points or channel point redemptions, since obviously it's been almost a year. Over a year since I've done a gym stream, and that's still on my agenda. So I don't plan to give up stream, at least if I can help it. Obviously, if I have to stop streaming, make ends meet, do it. But as long as I can meet my needs, I don't have any intention to stop streaming. I have plans. Other things to do with I plan to bring back the gym stream. Actually, whatever, the smallest of update is the space that I used to stream my gym stream from. That was like a private gym studio. Okay, the original company shut down. Okay, and I think I provided that update in the Discord. Like this particular company, which was a startup, and their business model was basically opening up these small spaces, private gyms, and that's what I used. That original company shut down, but that one singular space that I was renting out from the company that has since gone out of the business. I believe, you're wrong, but I believe one person. Basically just bought that one space. Okay, as in from what I understand, you're wrong. Mostly just what I gathered from bits and pieces of information, is as the startup company that had these multiple locations, private gyms shut down. They want to sell off as much stuff as possible, and I think they sold off at one individual private student, like one person. And I believe I know who that person is. And there might be potential, if whatever makes some sort of arrangement with them, or just obviously instead of renting from the company that is shut down, just renting from that particular that bought that space. And there's also, again, there's other spaces that have actually opened up around me, that I might be able to from. All that to say, that's a long-winded way of saying that yeah, I absolutely, totally plan to bring back gym stream, some form or another. I'm pretty determined on finding a way. I totally, I obviously enjoy this aspect in the science and research, but I obviously enjoy gym aspect, and so I'm doing my best. Right now, my immediate goal, like my more short term, is to get back to a regular stream. And the tutoring probably helps in that dimension or that direction, since I can sort of make my own schedule. Oh, it's not a standard like 9 to 5, but like I definitely have some say in how I make my schedule, and so that actually helps. I'm trying to sort of orient my schedule that I can carve out space for a more regular stream, and then from there hopefully branch out, obviously bring back the gym, which I'm pretty confident that I can do. It's just hopefully just a matter of time. That is a pretty big update. Well, so I imagine, Bob Marley, obviously it's been since last week. It's been a minute since you got an update like from you. I imagine you're probably in the middle of a semester, in the middle of your economics program, maybe in your second to last year. I'll be honest, I can't remember exactly where you were, your degree, but obviously I know that you were an avid gym goer, or a regular gym goer, mostly with your friends, and so if you actually, and I know that you were slowly investing in at-home gym equipment. I think you got, if I remember correctly, you got like a full squat rack with like a barbell and all that stuff, and so it seems like now you got your entire home gym pretty much like fully equipped, maybe like also a bunch of dumbbells as well, which is super great. Ideally I would eventually open my own home gym. Hopefully that's also, obviously if I'm able to do that, have my own home gym, then like I can stream from there. But me having my own fully equipped home gym, that's more of a pipe dream. I don't actually know if I can make that a reality. Maybe at some point I can invest in a squat rack and barbell, like a fully equipped gym. Obviously that's pie in the sky type of dream, but who knows, maybe it can happen. Final exams in May. Okay, and already applied, so that's fantastic. Good for you. And well, if you're going to pursue graduate studies, that's, as someone who spent a lot of time in grad school, I encourage it, but obviously, make sure that it's something that you really want to do. But at the end of the day, a master's is fairly, not low risk, but, not as much as an investment as, a PhD. A master's, depending on the institute program, that can be 1 year, 2 years, maybe at most 3 years on the institute. Your standard master's for most programs, 1 or 2 years. Even if you end up not enjoying it, it's not like you wasted time. Even then, regardless, even if you drop out time. A professor liked your dissertation, so he wants, oh, okay. Well then, it's like you've cultivated, you cultivate not only connections, but you've cultivated pretty much a strong, rigorous academic background in the research direction, which is a super great thing. And then maybe now, okay, or once you start graduate school, although pretty much now by default, you're more or less my go-to resident expert when it comes to economics math. Now that you're pursuing grad school, you're my more official, or fully credentialed and qualified resident economics expert. But yeah, that's pretty much what has been going on, more or less, to reiterate what I shared last stream. And also, again, I want to thank anyone that passed by last stream. And well, obviously, thank you as well again, Bob Marley, for passing by, as always. Where, yeah, it was definitely a warm welcome return. You never know when it comes to content creation. Like, if you take a break, the audience might totally move on, or you might have zero audience to return to. And I'm under no delusion at whatever. Not that I ever had any sort of massive following or massive viewership. But, there's some expectation. Whatever limited viewership that I had before taking a break, probably even more limited now. And I probably have to back up wherever I was. But that's totally fine by me. So, getting into the research stuff in my break, there's always research coming out. There have definitely been some interesting papers that I had wanted to cover and every intention of covering, and at some point, I will cover them. Hopefully a matter of time. But, I still have been staying up to date on, multiple avenues of research. And, well, yeah, trying to get back to my roots of covering. So, as highlighted in my stream title, if people, I don't know how many people in my audience actually follow Andrew Huberman closely, but he's definitely one of, if not the most popular ever science communicator / science content creator. Like, probably has at least 1 million or a couple million of subscribers on YouTube, in addition to like whatever podcast, etc. I would say pretty massive following, in my opinion, and also pretty his rise to fame has been pretty quick, pretty meteoric, which is not inherently a bad thing, but it's almost like overnight, like pretty much all over the place. And well, so Bob Marley, you're like also, in addition to my resident economics expert, you're also a source of lots of great research articles. I think you sent me, I know you sent me that great research article on, social media, or specifically like Facebook and mental health. So like, yeah, I always encourage you. You're not obligated, but I'm always open to research, and I always appreciate any research there. But let me. All right. So, yeah, I don't want to like waste, or yeah, I guess that's term that I can think of. I don't want to waste a lot of time on this because I don't see it as a big deal. At the end of the day, Andrew Huberman, he has a large following. He is a credentialed scientist. Way more credentialed than I am. Way more popular than I am. And whatever, as has been in academia way longer than I have. And there's totally quite a few. I'm not a regular consumer of his content. I think, in general, in my experience, but who am I to criticize? I find his content pretty hit or miss. Sometimes really high quality, and then sometimes pretty mediocre, or not that great quality. But again, who am I to say? Who am I to criticize? But what I will say, there are absolutely some criticisms that I can relay with confidence. I think even my background music is fine. I think that's hopefully better. And also, yeah, I'm still sort of getting into the swing of things, of whatever, streaming, and keeping track of audio, and making sure that my settings are correct. If anything's off in the video or audio, let me know. I'll try to fix it. Again, still trying to get back into the swing of things. But yeah, so I don't consume his content all that much, but definitely there are totally quite a few, whatever, episodes or podcasts of his that seem to be pretty high quality, that, I've listened to from beginning to end. Typically his content, or one of his podcasts is like at least 1 hour, if not 2 or 3 hours. And he definitely, at least for some of the content I've seen, he appears to do a deep dive on some topics. But then I would say, again, in my opinion, he falters, and definitely when he kind of like, in my opinion, strays outside of his wheelhouse, of like not strictly the neuroscience stuff, I think he falters. And there have been some clear examples, at least in my mind, where he has faltered. In terms of just like getting something plain wrong, just because talking about that are not strictly in the neuroscience field. Although I would say he should know these things, because these are one of the things that he got wrong. I guess I'll show a clip. Literally, high school chemistry stuff. Really bizarre, but maybe rusty. High school chemistry. It was when he was talking about, did a whole podcast on water fluoridation. That was like really bizarre, in my opinion. It's in this channel. Water filter. Oh yeah, so obviously I've watched this one. Let me change the quality. And even just the fact that he seems, well, again, I'm not, and definitely not an expert on water fluoridation and water filtration and whatever the contents of tap water. I'll let the experts debate that. But there's a particular instance, okay, when he's talking about water filtration, that like is just like plain like factually wrong. Some might say, okay, that it's me nitpicking and me being super pedantic, but he's an academic. I don't have as much experience as him in academia, but I have quite a bit of experience in academia. And if I ever made that mistake, in a conference, in a presentation, in a committee meeting, I would be totally like taken to task, or like maybe almost like kicked out of the program, like right there on the spot, because it's such a basic, simple thing that's like fundamental. It's like equivalent like a mathematician, not knowing basic. I also see Huberman saying some stuff that sounds a bit crazy and people on him, but then he seems to have a pretty impressive. Yeah, and that's where it gets super tricky, right? And there's another article, so I'm not going to read this full piece that was written about him. Pretty much, largely this article is focused on basically, his questionable behavior outside of science. Largely focused on his personal life, understandably, people can see that as like separate or irrelevant to what he says scientifically. And I would say even, I wouldn't call it even questionable behavior outside science, at least in my opinion, is great, unethical or immoral. But regardless, you can be a bad actor and an immoral person and still, technically do good, high quality, accurate science and science reporting. But there's another article that I will read that pretty much, I would say, touches upon sort of how, Andrew Huberman kind of like really skirts that line, or like how Andrew Huberman, similar to like Dr. Oz, makes it really difficult for people to evaluate the quality of the information, because it's like I said, there's totally good and accurate information coming from Andrew Huberman, but then there's other stuff that's not so great, and so it's like, well, how do you filter that out? How do you know when is the good information, when is the not so good information, etc. It would almost be better if he was just straight telling lies and misinformation 24/7. Because like, I would say that's easier to filter out and recognize, as opposed to like, whatever, 50% true and accurate, or 51%. The other 49% is like questionable and sketchy. That's where it gets great. But going back to what I wanted to sort of show as an example of like, venturing outside your lane and getting some like pretty basic stuff wrong. I need to go to the transcript when he's talking. Pretty... Not show up anymore. I think around...
Remove fluoride and all the other things that you want out of your tap water is immense. In fact, you can find and all the other things that you want out of your tap water is immense. In fact, as I mentioned before, the range on water filter costs for filters that can add, whole house water filters that are, 2,000, basically, technically could effectively drink from any or all things disposable in, do have them cost. Some common ones remove the things that you want. They don't really, and they're going to filtered water options, because there's no tablet or
I should have had
simple mechanism that can be purchased as a transportable. Aware of one comment section on YouTube, that'd be the best place, so that I and everyone else some choices. Filtration, mechanical, both mechanical. Those are two filtration. What I mean by that is when you are doing creating pores, almost always they contain certain calcium could get through, but fluoride doesn't. And that's because these filters have been very cleverly designed in order to neutralize fluoride.
So whatever, he's talking about chemistry stuff, not super advanced chemistry, but he's talking about like filtering stuff, and he's talking about filtering ions, okay? Filtering ions out of water, and more specifically, he seems to be concerned with filtering out fluoride, as he's flagging fluoride in tap water as a bad thing. Yeah, whether that's true or not, I can't really say. I'm not an expert on tap water or water fluoride. I've seen some research, but I'll let the actual experts hopefully answer that question. But either way, he's talking about water filtration and the type of water filter. And he's trying to use chemistry terms, understandably, when doing that, and he's just like straight using the wrong terms, which I will try to point that out when he actually said.
Or to prevent large molecules such as sediment and dirt, which is kind of easy to imagine being filtered, but also to allow certain small molecules like calcium, which is small-ish, or magnesium, which is smallish, to still pass through into our drinking water.
All right, so that's the actual mistake. And again, some people would say I'm being pedantic and, whatever, hypercritical. It's just a small little mishap. But again, if I were to make this mistake at any point in my academic career, I would be understandably crucified. The mistake that he makes, that is like an explicit mistake, just factually wrong, is when he says that calcium...
Like calcium, which is small, but also to allow certain small molecules like calcium, which is small-ish, or magnesium, which is smallish, to still pass through into our drinking water.
Calcium is not a molecule, okay? Calcium is an atom/element from the periodic table. It is explicitly like molecules. That term means a specific thing, and you don't use the term molecule when referring to like calcium or magnesium. Those are ions. And then afterwards, okay, he also refers to...
And this is wonderful, small-ish, but also to allow certain small molecules like calcium, which is small-ish, or magnesium.
And he also refers to them as small-ish. And again, this, understandably, for some people, it might be pedantic and just like nitpicky, but to refer to them, okay, again, these are atoms and ions, pretty much like these are like as small as you can get. Like, unless you're going to like the subatomic level, okay, to refer to them as small-ish is just like really bizarre. Where it's sort of me, I'm asking the question whether he actually understands the scale of like molecules and atoms. And he thinks like, calcium as an atom is like, again, going smaller than that, you're going to like subatomic particles, going to like electrons, protons, neutrons. So it's like two mistakes all in the span of like one singular. of like to refer to calcium and magnesium as like molecule, like they are not molecule at all in any capacity whatsoever, and to refer to them specifically as like smallish, or he's questioning, their size, understand the scale of the size that he's talking about, is just like really strange and just like explicitly wrong. But again, for someone outside of academia, someone might see that as like pedantic and hypercritical. But again, if I were to make that mistake, I would be taken to task pretty heavily. And there are a couple of other, again, I haven't consumed much of his content. Like I've maybe in total, I've watched maybe a dozen or so of his podcasts, like from end, like the full like 1 hour, 2 hour, or but even of the dozen or so episodes that I've listened to in full, like there appears to be a pretty disproportionate amount of mistakes that are made, in my opinion. But like, what do I know? Again, Andrew Huberman is way more credentialed than I am, has a much longer history in academia than I do. But there have been totally other well-credentialed academics that have questioned or called into question Andrew Huberman, and this is an example of such a person. So this person, Andrea Love, they are a scientist. I believe they're a microbiologist. Give me a mini biography. So yeah, they have their PhD. They're a microbiologist, immunologist, and science communicator. I believe he has her own podcast. I believe in partnership with another scientist. I think also a biologist, microbiologist. Can't remember their podcast partner is or what their credentials are. But I believe, if I remember correctly, like they both have a PhD, and essentially both in like the life science. So she wrote this article that I think pretty fair critique of him. So the wildly popular podcaster and scientist claims to help you live a healthier life, but we should think of him as a Dr. Oz type. I would say pretty much Dr. Oz these days, well, first of all, not a scientist, a medical doctor, and some people see those as synonymous. Although he certainly, I believe he does have like a research background, a medical research background. But, from what I understand, like a well-respected cardiac surgeon, if I remember correctly. Definitely Dr. Oz is very popular. But I would say, my opinion, pretty problematic and just like peddles, sells, pretty much faulty or like, poor quality supplements that almost certainly don't do anything. And is just like almost certainly a money-making scheme. And just like there are a whole host of other issues with Dr. Oz in my mind. I've also heard him say some stuff about weed that seem to have different results. Yeah, exactly. But maybe Andrew Huberman gets it right, I get it wrong. But it is a little bit strange, okay, that going by this clip alone in that one sentence, Andrew Huberman, I assume, I don't actually know, but I assume he has a whole team behind him. When he does his podcast, I don't know if it's actually him, doing all the research and collecting it, curating it. Maybe at some point it was, when he originally started off, probably as a solo project. But I'm reasonably sure, I don't know for sure, I'm reasonably sure at this point, he is so large that he probably has, a team of people that are probably writing scripts for him, or at least giving input on scripts, and, is helping in curating the research or going through it, or maybe just doing all the research and the curation totally outsourced, and Andrew Huberman is just like the mouthpiece. I don't exactly know how it works. But, assuming he has some sort of team that's involved in, like, his script writing, or what he produces in these videos, the fact that he gets, like, just a basic high school chemistry thing wrong, in terms of referring to calcium and magnesium, molecule is just like really bizarre to me. But again, going back to what you just touched upon, Bob Marley, maybe he gets it right, and cannabis department, I get it right. But I think it's fair to say that maybe I don't cover as many papers as he does, covers a topic. But I think it's fair to say that, when I cover at least one singular paper, I think I cover it pretty in-depthly. I think there are pretty clear instances that I'll read a paper like from beginning to end and, go through pretty much every single section. At the very least, like, cover 80% of it, like, skip out on some of the methodology. I'm not qualified comment on every single type of methodology. So we live in a world of misinformation and fear-mongering. Headlines bombard us with claims about cancer, chronic illness, the dangers of our food, toxins. Health anxiety seems to be at an all-time high. Enter Andrew Huberman. He has a PhD in neuroscience, and here is where, I'm going to get pretentious. Maybe a little elitist, or a lot elitist. People seem to have these preconceived notions about neuroscientists, and for whatever reason, maybe justified reasons, I don't know, but neuroscientists seem to get elevated, above other types of scientists. Or if you're studying the brain, almost like I think maybe people are making like some sort of inference that if you're studying the brain, you must have like a big brain yourself, or just neuroscientists sounds fancy and sophisticated, and therefore you must be like this ultimate rigorous scientist studying something as complex as the brain. But if you look into the academic background, and this may be one of the reasons why he got a basic high school chemistry fact wrong, is because it doesn't have that. If I remember correctly, if you look into the academic background of Andrew Huberman, he has a bachelor's degree in psychology. Where it's like I don't think he has rigorous training in chemistry, biology. It's like, okay, again, might be pretentious. You can almost like skip the line, or like skip ahead. Being a scientist by like going through a bachelor's in psychology, and then you can do your graduate studies in neuroscience. Your hard sciences scientist label. Not to knock on people that have bachelor's degrees in psychology, but I think it's fair to say that those who get their undergraduate degree or bachelor's degree in psychology, they don't get as much training in chemistry, biology, molecular biology, biochemistry, etc. And maybe that's why, with that information in mind, I can sort of understand at some level, even though, again, I would say it's still quite bizarre at the PhD, postdoc, full tenured professor level, that you get like a basic high school chemistry from. But it might just be the fact that his chemistry training or chemistry learning like stopped at whatever the high school, first year university level. So yeah, PhD in neuroscience with research expertise in optic nerve signaling. His wildly popular podcast claims to make science more understandable while giving you simple, zero-cost protocols for your health. The appeal Huberman offers is obvious: control over our health when it feels like we have none. In reality, his podcast is focused on pseudoscience. He often makes claims that appear scientific but lack evidence, plausibility, and validity. Pseudoscience presents unsubstantiated conclusions, but it can be incredibly hard to distinguish from conclusions. And that's where, I think, going back to this water filtration and water fluoridation aspect, a little bit problematic, where, again, I'm not an expert in water filtration or water fluoridation, but what I can get. there doesn't seem to be major issues, at least so far. Somewhat fatal now, or some scientists seem to be testing water fluoridation. But at the very least, the impression that I got from watching this clip, that's how I found the mistake, is like, watching this clip, I think pretty much the main message is like, tap water is bad for you. Like, you are not filtering your water. You're just exposing yourself to like a bunch of toxins and a bunch of bad stuff. Therefore, you need to filter your water somehow. Almost like an imperative. And I think probably overstated. So back to the article. And that's where, it contains grains of truth, but those grains of truth are exaggerated beyond the point of usefulness, insofar as to lead away from the truth. Huberman fills his podcast with confident displays of pseudoscience, topped with the appeal to authority he garners by regularly repeating his academic credentials to gain your trust. The March 25th New York Magazine cover story, which is right here, some label it as a hit piece, trying to take him down for whatever, for the just because author, or some people just don't like him, finding any excuse to write something negative about him. And there is a valid criticism of this article. Like, yeah, it is largely focused on his personal life, and again, I would say his unethical, immoral behavior. But they do cover, I would say, some of the problematic science stuff, or science communication stuff, that he engages in. And his podcast is, I think, always sponsored, or he always has some sort of ad about AG1 or Athletic Greens. And I personally, let's just say, if you ever see me shilling Athletic Greens, please call me out, or stop tuning into me. I would say if I'm ever shilling for Athletic Greens, and I have no research to back it up, maybe at some point Athletic Greens will run their own to show some sort of benefit. But if I'm ever reading ads for Athletic Greens, feel free to out. I would say I've crossed the line at that, in my opinion, and I'm not living up to my own values. So the March 25th New York Magazine, laid out, blah, 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 that he was seeing 6 women simultaneously. Further, that story says his lab at Stanford, according to knowledgeable sources, barely exists. Whether this is true or not, I have no idea. Whether or not you care about infidelity and hosts' personal lives, listeners to Huberman's podcast should not sweep aside contents of the New York Mag story as mere gossip. Which, I agree with you. There are actual valid criticism of him aside from life stuff. As a biomedical scientist who has spent a lot of time considering what Huberman has to say, I can tell you that he is leading his podcast audience too. If you're not a fan of his work, let me give you an indication of what his episodes are. Exceedingly long, often over 2 hours, but I would say there's nothing inherently wrong about this. If he's, whatever, my streams, typically hours, maybe even sometimes 4, length of time doesn't necessarily correlate to the quality of information. He fills them with scientific sounding jargon, stringing together names of genes or proteins that a listener might hear and think, hey, he is using complex lingo. He must really know his stuff. But jargon gives the illusion that Huberman intimately understands topics he doesn't. And that's where it gets tricky. At least for many people. Understandably, for many people, not in the sciences, or not in the particular field that he's talking about. Where even just the clip that I played, or just, small segment of the clip I played, he is using technical language. As I pointed out, he's attempting to use chemistry terms, but he's totally misusing them and giving just factually incorrect information about describing certain things in the chemistry world. But some people make the leap that if you're using sophisticated, sciencey language, then you must automatically know what you're talking about. And that's absolutely not the case. Scientists, for all their knowledge, are trained to know a lot about a relatively narrow field. He inserts widely held generalizations. Sleep is important, exercise is beneficial, and lifestyle can impact our health to add legitimacy. If you agree with some of his statements, then why not everything? Huberman frequently supports his assertions by saying things like supported by peer-reviewed or science-backed, right? And that's where, from what I gather of the dozen or so episodes that I've listened to in full, the overall style is like collecting a bunch of research, or at least giving the impression that he's collected and sifted through a bunch of research and summarizing all of the main findings of like, hey, pretty much I've done the legwork for you. I've gone through these, dozens and dozens of papers, and I've just extracted out, all the good beneficials that you don't need to go through all the technical reading papers to understand the conclusion. I'm just giving you the, which there is some utility and validity to that approach. But there's a reason, at least for me, I don't take that approach. Where I think at most, like one stream that's like 3 or 4 hours, I maybe at most go through like 3 or 4 papers. But even then, like one of my streams focused on one paper, maybe like going through early, more or less from the end, where I think unless you're going to cite a meta-analysis or like a good review article, just him summarizing research is problematic in and of itself. Oh, and Noda Bud, welcome. Great to see you. Would having to live under deliberate effect? Well, maybe. So that's the piece of research that I'm going to cover in a bit. Where if you consider living in a liberal government a childhood adverse life event, then totally it might affect your mitochondria. Because this is, in my opinion, a very interesting piece of research that was recently published just this month, March 2024. We'll get to it shortly. But yeah, it's make this association, not saying anything about causation, but an interesting association. But I hope you're doing well, Notabud. Great to see you. And I hope you're doing. What is the max length of paper have for you? Read it. I don't think there's really any length. I think I've covered papers that are like, 10, like 20 pages. Whether I don't think I've ever read like a 20-page paper, and I think maybe at most I've read like 8-page, 10-page. But there's, if I'm understanding your question correctly, there's no limit. Like if it's a paper that I'm interested in, like even if it's like a book that somehow whatever, even though I've never come across a research paper that is 50 pages or 100 pages, unless it's a whole bunch of supplemental material. That totally happens, where like the main paper that's published like 5 or 6 pages, and then online there's 30 pages of supplemental material. But yeah, at least for me, there's not really any limit. It's interesting, and I feel like I can actually do it justice. Okay, those are my guiding principles. Of like, it's comprehensible to me. There's a question there, if I'm actually understanding it. But even then, unless I'm super confident, I'm covering research that is explicitly, let's say, my area of expertise. Like, this is something that I know. I try to provide the caveat that, like, I'm summarizing it, and, like, best that I can, try to interpret it best I can. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. So, Huberman frequently supports his assertions. I already read that. But it's important to know that not all studies are created equal. That's where, that's where the difficulty comes in. Where, understandably, okay, unless you have the appropriate training, or unless you're a scientist yourself, you're not really going to understand, or you're not going to really fully appreciate sort of like the hierarchy of evidence, okay? Or there have totally been times where, like, Andrew Huberman will, say the conclusion of a paper, okay, and here's his recommendation based off of this paper. And then when you go and look at it, it's an in vitro, or it's like a mouse study. And, relying on that to, make conclusions or provide recommendations or guidelines, pretty sketchy behavior, in my opinion. But again, I don't have the credentials. So yeah, some studies are done on cells in a petri dish, in vitro, or on animals. In others, scientists ask people to fill out surveys recalling details from their days or weeks, or they observe human participants' behavior in a lab. Neither of these methods creates particularly reliable results for humans, where if you are going to try to make recommendations to humans or provide conclusions, about humans, your research should have humans, like fully fledged human organisms. Not human cell lines, not cells in a dish. Well, there's a reason why, to generally speaking, or in the vast majority of cases, get a drug approved market, you need to go through the full human clinical trials, multiple phases. You need to see how it works at the full human organism level. Other studies are controlled clinical research, like studies where some people receive treatment, others a placebo. That is the kind of research you want to see or undertaking a health intervention. But even there, study design matters. And again, this is where it gets complicated. I'm definitely not an expert in clinical trials. I'm not a clinician. I've certainly participated as a patient in trials, but I've never designed a clinical trial. I've never received formal training in designing clinical trials. But I've certainly read a lot of them. Some rough ideas in terms of what makes a good, or what tends towards a good versus a bad one. It dictates how strong the data can be and how much you can conclude. Think about yourself and then think about a layer of cells growing on a piece of plastic. There's a big difference. Things that happen to cells in a plastic dish, say when you add an ingredient found in a dietary supplement to them, aren't representative of what will happen to a person consuming those supplements. We have to consider the physiological relevance and limitations of a study when we analyze the data, findings which are often used by scientists to determine further avenues of exploration or to add piece detail to the picture of how biology works. Huberman often doesn't do that. Instead, he extrapolates non-human data to people using in vitro studies or in vivo studies on non-human animals to make prescriptive recommendations for lifestyle changes. He cherry-picks weak or irrelevant studies while discarding larger and more robust studies that demonstrate something different. If you're not conducting research or regularly dissecting scientific studies, this might not be obvious, but to scientists, it is. Why do you think so many of these pop professors often turn out to be quacks, do you think? So again, here's where I'm going to get pretentious or elitist. Let me bring it. So, here's me attempting to ground my opinions slash elitism in research. Okay, where again, like I said, if you look into the academic background, okay, of Andrew Huberman, pretty much his background, at least his bachelor's degree, is psychology. Okay, he's a neuroscientist now. He pursued his PhD. Okay, and I believe he did his postdoc. Rather, 99% sure he did his postdoc. Okay, that's what allows him to use the neuroscientist label slash credential. But at the end of the day, his roots are in psychology. And there's some interesting research, at least to me, in terms of what is the type of student, or what are the reasons why people go into psychology? Because I've asked myself this question of as much as I cover psychological research, there appears to be some issues some of it, or a large part of it, is like studying humans is messy. You know, the social sciences never control all the variables, and you're dealing with humans, messy data, noisy data, doing a lot of statistical analyses, and that's why, you know, I have a lot of criticisms towards, you know, psychological research. But I understand, you know, it's virtually impossible to have like super high quality psychological research. But then I've also asked myself the question, like, you know, does psychology just like attract, you know, poor quality researchers? Like you're basically not getting, you know, the absolute best when it comes to academic. And there appears to be some element of truth to that. It does not describe, you know, every single person that goes into psychology, as this research, you know, out. But this basically, okay, tries to describe, okay, the type of student, or the types of student that pursue psychology, okay, and I came across this research because I was asking myself this question: does psychology just cultivate bad students? Just bad students go into psychology and then, you know, just become full tenure professors? They carry out their own research, and it just ends up being poor quality research. So, in this research, as they say, college student characteristics and psychology major choice, like what drives some of the decision making that students make in pursuing psychology. Basically, what are the reasons? There are multiple, at least based off of this research. You know, for a portion of students, okay, psychology is a plan B. Plan B in the sense that they couldn't cut it, you know, quote unquote, real STEM or real science. And psychology is just like, oh, this is the easier science. I can pursue that. There's also the other side of the coin of like, there are some students that they start off in psychology, okay, and through them finding out that they're actually excelling in psychology, of like, oh, this is easy, they basically drop out of psychology and actually pursue real science. As in like, oh, through them going through psychology through a couple years, and they realize, oh, I'm actually like a good student and this is like easy to me, I can actually pursue, you know, the quote unquote hard sciences and actually pursue, you know, quote unquote real science. So overall, the results, as they say in the discussion, the results paint a mixed picture for the field. Before college begins, psychology attracts students who have been exposed to the field and have done well. These students tend to be somewhat more diverse than other groups and tend to perform reasonably well on indicators of academic preparedness, with the exception of math. Okay, you know, maybe no surprise, psychology students don't seem to be all that great at math. By the second year, the field has drawn in students from other majors who are generally above average in academic performance, although not extraordinarily so. After that, the field appears to get a second wave of students who are not doing well in college and who entered college with weaker verbal and mathematical reasoning skills. The difference in academic skills is especially large when we shift from considering the general student body and focus on STEM majors. And as they continue on, psychology students, on average, have markedly lower quantitative, verbal, and writing skills and high school grades than STEM majors. Although the effect is comparatively small, psychology majors score slightly lower even on the AP psychology exam than those STEM majors who also took the exam. Then, same exam, okay, you know, STEM majors tend to overall, on average, always exceptions, but on average, perform better. Although there is considerable variability in both groups, to the extent that psychology is moving toward a greater reliance on complex methods, just that the talent pool could be stronger. So yeah, the results suggest that psychology does indeed act as a backup major for some students who are struggling academically. Creating barriers to these students, for example, more prerequisites, more statistics, and more psychometrics, would likely reduce the number of students majoring in psychology. The implications for the health of psychology programs and the field in general would depend on our goals. Well, like, yeah, basically reiterating what I said, of like, for a certain amount of students, Psychology is basically a fallback plan. They started off in the STEM, or whatever, quote unquote, the real STEM, one of the real sciences, like whatever, chemistry, physics, whatnot. They find out that they're not performing as expected, and so they pursue psychology. And like I said, there's the other side of the coin, of there's students that start off in psychology, and they realize they pretty much get a boost in confidence, and they actually pursue, real STEM, real science. But there's also the students, okay, and they cover in this paper. There are students that are passionate about psychology. That is pretty much, almost from the get-go. That they knew they wanted to study psychology, and they're a top performer. Make no mistake, I'm not saying that everyone that pursues psychology is just like a poor student. There's there's a demographic of students that pursue psychology that are really top performers, that are really rigorous, but they're pursuing psychology out of passion, and they totally excel at it. But there appears to be this sort of little issue with psychology, as seen as it's sciencey enough, okay, that it allows for people, pretty much the people that want to pursue sciences, but they couldn't sort of cut it the real sciences. I'm being pretentious, or rather I am being pretentious, of they gave it a shot, and didn't work out, so I'm gonna go move into psychology because it's still sciencey enough. And then like I said, beating myself. But then there's the ones that they weren't so confident, maybe in their abilities. They start off in psychology, they realize that it's not so difficult, or realize that they're excelling, and that they can actually they make the switch, like biology, biochemistry, chemistry, physics. So maybe, okay, I'm not saying this explains all of what occurs in psychology. I'm just, might be a piece of the puzzle. I have no idea how big a piece that is. Again, whether this actually explains Andrew Huberman, I have no idea. I'm not going to make any sort of judgments. No, just throwing it out there. Being bad at math isn't great if you're in a field that should require. I agree with you, and that's why maybe that's one of the reasons why. That's why I asked that question. Why does a lot of psychological research seem to be, really not that great quality, in my opinion? Who's a non-expert? I've covered peer review and issues with peer review. So I've dug into the research, on that, and I've also asked the question of maybe people that go into psychology, those students aren't really that quality student, and there seems to be an element of truth. I took a year of psychology, unfortunately. Liberal white, that just describes pretty much virtually all of university, generally speaking. Pretty much virtually every university in the developed world or in Western countries dominated by women, and university is, generally speaking, largely liberal leaning. So nothing that you're saying is, you can say that about biology, you can say that about molecular biology. Continuing on. No, you will find them in engineering. And, I'm hoping to stick it out long enough that, in 10 years from now, save the VOD or clip it out now. In 10, 20 years from now, if I'm still streaming, I will probably bring up the fact that hearing the demographics are slowly shifting. Whether it's actually going to fully equal out, different story. Find out. We're going to find them in engineering. Take an episode on how cortisol and adrenaline can boost energy and immune function. He calls sleep the ultimate reset for the body following a stressful day. Then he goes on to tout ashwagandha supplements as basically a miracle panacea for. According to him, it has a profound effect on anxiety and can reduce stress, cortisol, and ED. He goes further, extrapolating cellular mechanisms. Ashwagandha may trigger a range of downstream effects, improving vision, cardiovascular health, and memory. These are a lot of bull. Upon my own literature review, I found in vitro studies using rat neurons, rat studies that included behavior assessment, and some other in vitro studies. Human data provides a confusing and more limited picture. 2012 study that suggested it can improve chronic stress had just 64 participants. A meta-analysis pooling data from 5 small randomized controlled trials found that it might help with sleep, particularly in people with insomnia, but found no significant effect on quality of life. Another noted the supplement significantly reduced anxiety, which refers to not relevance. If you look at the data, sample sizes are small and outcomes rely on self-reported symptoms. The overall assessment concluded that there is weak confidence in the link to ashwagandha, which warrants further high-quality studies. Ariella Studies, welcome. Great to see you, and also hello to you and shout out to you. Which, let's see if I can do this properly. So Ariella Studies is, I believe, pursuing both their MD and PhD. And I believe, no, I don't believe, I know that they do lab stream, as I once did back in the day. But if you want more science content and actual lab stream, I believe, if I remember correctly, if you work with C. elegans, or at least some sort of worm in a dish. And they also do art streams as well. So yeah, if you're not following Ariella Study, I think you absolutely should. Okay, well, good. But yeah, definitely, if I made a mistake, correct me. But yeah, another life scientist. But I have zero experience with C. elegans. You know, I've studied them as a model organism, especially when I was taking developmental biology. But yeah, I'm a biochemist. I do protein and E. coli work. My economics professor, econometrics professor, said he's read through some biology papers because he did. He said most of the papers either have statistical errors or, yeah, you know, and I don't know what's causing that. You know, I'm not gonna sit here and say that, you know, the life sciences are doing everything perfectly. There are absolutely major issues in the biological sciences. And there's definitely replication issues in the biological sciences. I don't think it's to the degree in psychology or social science. But like, yeah, whether what we're observing is the result of, you know, let's say peer review or all the issues, or something about psychology students themselves, or a combination of the two, something else entirely, I have no idea. But it is definitely concerning. Yeah, so definitely when I look, when I've seen the diagrams and some of the videos of C. elegans, they certainly look cool. But I just, yeah. Pretty much, I don't really, of the limited time that I've done it, working with organisms that I don't have like really good control over, not super fun to me. I generally don't like worrying about, you know, contamination, and pretty much, you know, uncontrolled environments. So, although at the end of the day, in the biological sciences, you never have full control of the environment. But like, you know, working with E. coli, not perfect, but way more robust. I can't remember the generation time of C. elegans. I assume pretty short, but you know, almost certainly doesn't compare to E. coli, where, you know, me losing a batch of E. coli, whatever, I can grow it up again fully, like 24 hours or less. As opposed to, I can't remember, but I think pretty sure maintaining C. elegans way easy. Or rather, maintaining E. coli is way easy. Elegans. That's why I sort of like shied away from anything more complicated than E. coli. And even then, I only work with E. coli to purify and express my protein. You know, I murder a lot of E. coli during my work. Oh right, yeah, I should have known that. Shows how far removed I am from C. elegans stuff. That makes total sense. Where was yeah? So yeah, I wouldn't suggest anyone bank their health on this stuff. So yeah, right now, okay, we're reading this article uh, about basically uh, should you trust Andrew Huberman, since there's been a lot of drama surrounding him. There was this piece, New York Magazine, that recently published about him, uh, which I'm not going to read the entire article, but I'm basically reading commentary about him from a fellow scientist, this Andrea Love individual. They are a microbiologist and immunologist, and who also hosts their own podcast. So, yes. But Huberman tells his listeners that ashwagandha comes through as the heavy hitter, alongside a liability caveat. You're responsible for making sure supplements are safe for you, to you. No, yeah. So that is, the Unbiased SciPod. So yeah, that is their podcast, where it's a duo. One of them, Andrea Love. I can't remember who their podcast partner is, but I know they're both PhDs, postdocs, the biological side. I just can't remember, unfortunately, their podcast partner is. But like, yeah, the Unbiased SciPod. I believe you are remembering it correctly. Which again, yeah, I'm a pretty big fan. Although I've unfortunately only consumed a limited amount of their content. But let's just say everything that I've consumed from their podcast, I heavily prefer over Andrew Huberman. His podcast content. In my opinion, I would say yes. He's selling pretty much BS supplements. I think if you watch any one of his episodes, saying he has an ad about Athletic Green, AG1, I'm almost 100% sure is not evidence-based. In another episode, there was an error so obvious that it would have been comical if it had been. Huberman was joined by Robert Lustig, a pediatric endocrinologist with a history of making hyperbolic claims about nutrition, like calling sugar poison. Lustig references a study to claim ultra-processed inhibits bone growth. Huberman asks, was this in vitro or in vivo? Which Lustig replies, in vivo. Huberman exclaims, so these are people that are eating high amounts of highly processed food. Exactly how did the researcher find those in the Middle East? Lustig answered, in Israel. While in vivo can technically refer to a study done in people, we are animals. The study Lustig was referring to was actually in rats. Claim that the results have a direct relevance to wild misinterpretation. And the truth around ultra-processed foods is complex. Huberman presents his conclusions if they are facts, and so trust him. I remember seeing a Nature article today. Yes, actually, I think are exactly referring this one. I already have it up. Published a couple days ago. The Great Rewiring. Social media really behind an epidemic of mental illness. By Candice L. Odgers, which I believe wrong, although I can just click the name. Where yeah, pretty much I believe this is basically one of their areas of expertise. I believe actually study, pretty much actually conduct some of the research in terms of social media and mental health or health. Which maybe we'll cover this right before this research. At the very least, I want to make sure cover the research that I put in my stream. Yeah, exactly. And well, as someone who's doing their MD, PhD, probably know better than I do in terms of clinical data, to use in vivo when it comes to humans. I've never really come across that terminology of an in vivo study, and we're referring to human participants. Where it's clinical data, typically pretty much that's at the level. The full human, organismal Huberman also uses false balance, the fallacy that equal and opposite sides always exist. And also, to your point, Bob Marley, I know that just recently, Jonathan Haidt, pretty much, there's this whole Twitter thread he outlined pretty much responding to that article. Whether, I don't know, night, next stream. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I've been want to cover. Take his thoughts on fluoride, right? And that clip that I showed, that's pretty much what he was referring to, what he was flagging as an issue of, this is why you need to filter your water. Well, basically, more specifically, he's essentially making the claim, or making the recommendation, that you need to filter out the fluoride from tap water. While fluoride has been used for decades to prevent dental disease, Huberman gives the impression that there is an ongoing debate among experts about its use, and reasons for his listeners to be careful of how much fluoride-containing tap water they consume. During his Oral Health podcast episode, Huberman undermines consensus data on fluoride, endorses fluoride-free toothpaste, as well as a yerba mate that uses fluoride-free water, and which he is a business partner of, and cites a dentist who spreads fear about fluoride as his expert reference. Huberman positions this for his listeners as information to make the best decision, as though we all need to be carefully thinking about our fluoride levels. An episode he did on colds and flu was so littered with, I think he mentioned, if I remember correctly, she's going to get to, of like, Huberman makes it clear, I think he explicitly says that he doesn't take the annual shot. And pretty much, whether I would put the, full label of anti-vax on him, no, probably not. But like, maybe trending in that direction, or whatever, the just asking questions type of approach. Advertised the episode as science-backed methods to prevent colds and the flu, but he announced he does not get the flu vaccine, the number one thing that prevents flu. A scientist waving aside the most science-backed measure to prevent the flu is not providing credible advice. Huberman claimed that the flu vaccine can be completely ineffective if it does not protect against the strain of flu that year, noting that he often does not get the shot himself. Here's how those vaccines actually work, though. Flu vaccines include 4 different flu strains, 2 influenza A and 2 influenza B viruses, which are selected from flu virus surveillance. While there are more possible flu virus strains, vaccination still provides broad protection against illness, hospitalization, and death from any flu viruses because of the polyclonal memory immunity generate. Even if you get infected with a different strain of the flu, if you've been vaccinated, it will make illness easier to weather than it would have been otherwise. From basic immunology 101 to how vaccines, which I believe Andrea Love, who wrote this article, they're strictly like area of expertise, immunology, or an actual immunologist. I could be wrong about that. But yeah, from basic immunology 101 to how vaccines work, virology, and the public health impact of it. That episode was littered with falsehoods. Even in that same episode, botched the relationship between exercise, cortisol, and immune function, and said antibodies are produced by stem cells in bone marrow. They are actually produced by B cells in our lymphoid organs, a fact which is fundamental to immunology. And then, so some might say, or at least those outside academia might say, this individual is being pedantic, but again, like I said, just as, whether I'm still an academic is questionable, but they are an academic, okay? And in academia, in my experience, you are taken to task if you get basic, fundamental things wrong, of pretty much not much room for simple mistakes. We call them B cells, if I remember correctly. They originate in the bone marrow. But that's just their origin. As T cells, call them T cells, if I remember correctly. They originate in the thyroid. But this, as they say, This is fundamental immunology, just as, like I said, you know, when he was in that clip, he was getting basic chemistry terminology wrong, as this individual, the actual immunologist, is getting just basic immunology 101 wrong. And that matters in academia. Get the fundamentals wrong, like you are taken to task, as you should be. Like, we try to hold ourselves to a standard, and like nitpicking the details, like what we're supposed to do. You're supposed to use the correct terms. You're supposed to get the fundamentals right, and pretty much know that as like back of your head. Yeah, exactly. And that's why, you know, going outside your area of expertise and pretty much straying outside your lane, you're going into pretty dangerous territory. If in fact, you know, you have other scientists or other experts listening. But like to the general audience, or to, you know, person, so to speak, these details, you know, understandably, you know, don't get flagged. He publicly replied in an Instagram comment that he consulted 3 MDs for the podcast episode, which is not actually that relevant. Doctors know a lot, but they're not inherently experts in immunology. That is true, just like straight fact. This brings us to the conflicts of interest, his sponsors. Having a paid sponsor isn't a disqualifier in and of itself, but when your financial conflicts seem to dictate your content, it should be. After dismissing legitimate data in the flu episode, his lengthy science-backed discussion about colds and the flu boiled down to an extended commercial for taking supplements. Huberman is sponsored by Athletic Greens, which sells a supplement powder called Age 1, which promises to support immunity and promote gut health. One easily gets the idea listening to Huberman that taking supplements of all sorts is very, very beneficial to your health. You know, pretty much generally speaking, at least of the research that I've seen, don't take my word for it, you know, consult a medical professional. But, you know, pretty much there are very few, you know, supplements that, you know, show any real tangible benefit or benefit. Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, depending on the doctor, you know, I understand, you know, some doctors, depending on, you know, the type of work that they do, some doctors are straight clinicians and pretty much, you know, largely they're seeing patients and, you know, diagnosing, prescribing, and, you know, they're divorced or like largely separated from, you know, I can see some scenarios, their anatomy and physiology and immunology, you know, might not be up to snuff after a certain amount of years. Maybe, I don't know, just as, you know, I've done calculus, but, you know, a lot of my calculus, which a large portion of my calculus is quite rusty. But steering your listeners into the wide and unregulated world of supplements is bad. At best, most supplements do nothing. At worst, they can be harmful, potentially fatal. And, you know, I've spoken about this before, and I've covered some of the research. You know, not only, okay, when it comes to supplements, which is pretty much, depending on where you are, but generally speaking, is a largely unregulated industry. And there's the issue of, like, well, is there actually evidence showing that the supplement that you're taking is actually beneficial? And also there's the issue of, like, are you actually, like, is what they're saying in the bottle actually in the bottle? Or, you know, I've shown some of the research of, like, you know, there are totally some supplements out there that, like, you know, there's pretty much either what they're advertising that's in there is not actually in there, or it's actually contaminated with something actually so that's why, you know, supplements are supplements are one of those common reasons we get otherwise healthy. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, you know, things like this, you know, people see them understandably, but unfortunately as innocuous. People just seem to make the association that, like, if it's, you know, sold at the pharmacy, you know, you don't need a prescription, that it must by default, or that means that it's safe. Not actually the case. So supplements, thanks to a fun legal loophole, can be sold without the burden of safety and efficacy data that Food and Drug Administration medications must generate. Aside from certain instances where a specific supplement would be recommended by a doctor for medical aid, there is no body of evidence to support supplements. No credible scientist should tell you to buy and consume a special supplement just in case. The problem with health misinformation is that it often misleads things that are ineffective or potentially harmful, while discouraging them from evidence-based interest. Those who believe in one piece of health misinformation are more likely to believe others. There is a direct relationship between wellness behaviors like buying supplements and believing medical. So yes, Huberman actively promotes medical conspiracies too. On the episode with Lustig, he suggests that 93% of Americans are inflamed and have leaky gut. This term leaky gut is problematic. A pseudoscience diagnosis promoted by the wellness industry. I've discussed the issues with that here. His endorsement will only propagate that misinformation. Biology is complex, and we don't have every answer to everything. Issues with our healthcare system compound the frustration and even desperation. But wellness products aren't a solution. They are an exploit. Wellness influencers like Huberman pit their solutions against conventional science and medicine to sell unproven inventions that are expensive, have no benefit, and lead you to delay real medical treatment or be actively harmful. I think overall, in my opinion, fair and valid criticism of Andrew Huberman. That is just my opinion. I also think the FDA should somehow get the category renamed. The word supplement has inherent connotations of, yeah, I agree with you. Of like pretty much, supplement is, I think, essentially synonymous with like something extra. And so, unfortunately but understandably, people have, people have their intuitions about, the word supplement. And I agree with you that pretty much it's unfortunate that the FDA, or let's say where I'm located in Canada, Health Canada, doesn't regulate, natural products or basically the supplement period. All right, so that's pretty much all I want. It's too much on Andrew. I really don't. Even though it's interesting, and he's whatever the most popular, if one of the most popular, if not the most popular, science content creator, better or for worse. But I think, in my opinion, the less focus on. But since you brought it up, Bob Marley, and since it's pill snacks, I think that's a cute term. Whether that will encourage or discourage the use of them, I can see that since it's sort of like a cute tongue-in term. It might further cultivate the consumption of them. I don't know, but I still do like that term. But since this is the short article, we'll go through, and then we'll get to the actual read. All right. Ooh, yeah. I think now that's more in the right direction. Yeah. Or how about untested substances? I think that will probably, most people's intuitions, I think, will lean towards the negative of untested substances as a category. But yeah, to what you brought up, Bob Marley, in terms of like this article, and also, expertise, etc. Where, so as you brought up, Bob Marley, Jonathan Haidt, he's written a number of books and a number of articles, and he's an academic, a social psychologist. But I do not believe, wrong, I don't believe his area of expertise is, social media and teenage mental health. But he seems to be writing a lot about it. Now, I can't really comment on it because I'm not a social psychologist, and even if I were, ever, still not my area of expertise probably. And so, pretty much, it is a little bit strange that Jonathan Haidt seems to have this really narrow focus on sounding the alarms on social media and mental health, and there appears to be, from my perspective, like at least this person, who I think is in actually the field of studying social media effects on mental health, and they seem to painting a different picture, or at least essentially saying that it is not so clear cut. Where Jonathan Haidt has, seemed to have come to like the firm, in concrete conclusion that social media is having a very negative effect on mental health, and yet, when you consult, the actual experts, ones who study it, and at least comes to this research here, something a little bit more different or a little bit more nuanced. As far as I can tell, at least, I've never come across any, expert saying that social media has no effect at all on mental health, but it's more, what is the magnitude of effect? Is the negative effect balanced out by some sort of positive? Basically, but the answer appears to be new. And I agree with you, but that's reasons why we have science. Of like, our intuitions can lead us astray. Very often our intuitions are correct. Very often also our intuitions are incorrect. The evidence is equivocal on whether screen time is to blame for rising levels of teen depression and anxiety, and rising hysteria could distract us from tackling causes. The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood Is. Articles. I think the book. Yeah, this is the book that Jonathan Haidt has written. Two things need to be said after reading The Anxious. First, this book is going to sell a lot of copies, because Jonathan Haidt is telling a scary story about children's development that many parents are primed to. Second, the book's repeated suggestion that digital technologies are rewiring our children's brains and causing an epidemic of mental illness is not supported by science. Worse, the bold proposal that social media might distract us from effectively responding to the real causes of the health crisis. Time Scroll, welcome. Good to see you on Nature. And now as a resume, thank you for the article. Copy this. Check. Moment. Every reason. Copy it. So I'm assuming, at least based off of what you've mentioned, Time Scroll, know someone from this, from these list of researchers, who were involved in. Cool. Okay. I assume at the time. Gotcha. Well, the first author. But I unfortunately don't have access to. At least, whatever. Not at my home computer. But I can get access to this on my university campus. Log in. But maybe I will cover this. Essentially neuroscience. I probably can't give it full justice, not my full area of expertise. But I definitely am familiar. A lot of things here. So far, nothing that abstract, unfamiliar. But thank you for sharing. And I don't want to butcher their name. Person are they in the Twitch community? uh, if they're open, maybe having a conversation about their own research, I appreciate the pun. I'd be totally open to having a conversation, or let's say, having them, giving me more detail, giving me the more thorough detail about the research. Pretty much communicating it better than I can, for sure, because they're the actual expert on their own. But yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm going to try and get access to this full article, and maybe if if what I'm understanding here holds true, that so far it seems comprehensive. So Haidt asserts that the great rewiring of children's brains has taken place by designing a fire hose of content that entered through eyes, and that by displacing physical play and in-person socializing, companies have rewired childhood and development on an almost unimaginable scale. Such serious claims require serious evidence. Haidt supplies graphs throughout the book showing that digital technology use, adolescent mental health problems are rising together. On the first day of the graduate statistics class I teach, I draw similar lines on a board that seem to connect two disparate phenomena and ask the students what they think it is. Within minutes, in telling elaborate stories about how the two phenomena are related, even describing how one could cause the other. What we call sort of spurious correlation. The plots presented throughout this book will be used in teaching my students fundamentals of causal inference and how to avoid making up stories by simply looking at trends. Hundreds of researchers, myself included, have searched for the kind of large effects by Haidt. Our efforts have produced a mix of no, small, and mixed. Most data are correlative. When associations over time are found, they suggest not that social media predicts or causes depression, but that young people who already have mental health problems use such platforms more often or ways from healthy people. These are not just our data or my opinion. Several meta-analyses and systematic reviews converge on the same message. An analysis done in 72 countries shows no consistent or measurable association well-being and the rollout of social globally. Moreover, findings from the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, the largest long-term study of adolescent brain development in the United States, has found no evidence of drastic change associated with digital technology use. Haidt, a social psychologist at NYU, is a gifted storyteller, but his tale is currently one certain. Of course, our current understanding is incomplete, and more research is. As a psychologist who has studied children's and adolescents' mental health for the past 20 years and tracked their well-being and digital technology use, I appreciate the frustration and desire for it. As a parent of adolescents, I would also like to identify a simple source of sadness and generation reporting. There are unfortunately no simple answers. Onset and development of mental disorders such as anxiety and depression are driven by a complex set of genetic and environmental factors. Suicide rates among people in most age groups have been increasing steadily for the past 20 years in the United States. Researchers cite access to guns, exposure to violence, structural discrimination, and racism, sexism, sexual abuse, the opioid epidemic, economic hardship, and social isolation as leading contributors. The current generation of adolescents was raised in the aftermath of the Great Recession of 2008. Haidt suggests that the resulting deprivation cannot be a factor, as unemployment has gone down. But analyses of the differential impacts of economic shocks have shown that families in the bottom 20% continue to experience harm. In the United States, close to 1 in 6 live below the poverty line while also growing up at the time of an opioid crisis, shootings, and increased unrest because of racial and sexual discrimination and violence. The good news is that more young people are talking openly about their symptoms and mental health struggles than ever before. The bad news is that insufficient supports are available to address their needs. In the United States, there is on average one school psychologist for every pretty much 1,000 students. for 1,100 students. Height's work on emotion, culture, and morality has been influential, and in fairness, he admits that he is no specialist in psychology, child development, or media studies. In previous books, he has used the analogy of an elephant and its rider to argue how our gut reactions, to the elephant, can drag along our rational minds, rider. Subsequent research has shown how easy it is to pick out evidence to our initial gut reactions to an issue. That we should question assumptions that we think carefully, a lesson from Height's own work. Everyone used to know that the world was flat. Falsification of assumptions by testing them can prevent us from being the rider dragged along by the elephant. Two things can be independently true about social. First, that there is no evidence that using these platforms is requiring children, driving an epidemic of mental illness. Second, that considerable reforms platforms are required given how much time young people spend on them. Many of Height's solutions to parents, adolescents, educators, big technology firms are reasonable, including stricter content moderation policies and requiring companies to take user age into account when designing platforms and algorithms. Others, such as age-based restrictions and bans on mobile devices, are unlikely to be effective in practice, or worse, could backfire given what we know about adolescent behavior. A third truth is that we have a generation in crisis and in desperate need of the best of what science and evidence-based solutions can offer. Unfortunately, our time is being spent telling stories that are unsupported by research that do little young people deserve more. So, again, this is coming from someone who at least has a claim in the article, much studies in mental health, and they're pretty much calling into question Jonathan Haidt's recent book, The Anxious Generation, and pretty much, pointing the finger at social media. Jonathan Haidt pretty much seems quite confident in their claim, or in their position, that social media negatively affects adolescent mental health, or child mental health. But I'd be curious to see how this plays out over time. Totally possible that over time, Jonathan Haidt will be demonstrated to be on the right side of history as more and more evidence comes out. So, to pretty much cover actual reasons I wanted to cover in my stream title, pretty much this paper here that was recently published this month, or whatever, about 3 or 4 weeks. About pretty much, so as I make pretty clear in my position in terms of the treatment of children, and I'm very staunchly and vigorously against childhood corporal punishment and childhood maltreatment. But many people, are more unfortunately on the pro side of childhood corporal punishment. They cite the fact that pretty much there's no good evidence, or there's not a lot of evidence showing that it has any real negative biological effect, or let's say it's difficult to find measurable biological changes, let's say as a result of childhood maltreatment or childhood adverse events of are these adverse events, or are our experiences actually affecting us at a biological measurable level to it. And this research here, again, published recently this month, pretty much is making the association, or let's say is finding an association between individuals essentially reporting a greater number of childhood adverse life events, and mitochondrial dysfunction, something going awry in their mitochondrial function. Now, again, This is an association. This doesn't establish causation, but it is an interesting association nonetheless. And obviously, more research is needed to establish any sort of causation. But as they say, stressful life events experienced early in the life course have been repeatedly shown with worse health later in life. Yet, the specific mechanism underlying this relationship remains poorly understood. More specifically, okay, in terms of the differences in mitochondrial function, finding that associated with childhood adverse life event is like, essentially their mitochondria don't appear to be, as everyone I think knows these days, as the meme, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, so like responsible for essentially energy production in the form of ATP, and basically their energy production appears to be like inhibited. Pretty much, it's not working, or at least compared to individuals with less childhood adverse life events. Their ATP production appears inhibited, or not working at maximal capacity, so to speak. So, mitochondrial bioenergetics, hereinafter referred to as mitochondrial function, is defined by changes in capacity to generate cellular energy in the form of adenosine triphosphate, and becomes impaired with age. Biochemistry 101. Recently, mitochondrial function has been implicated as a possible mechanism for understanding how stressful life events get under the skin to influence health and well-being. Mitochondria are capable of sensing and integrating social stress on a cellular level in response to psychological stress. Mitochondria undergo dynamic changes in structure, leading to alterations in one potential pathway by which early childhood stress may lead to changes in mitochondrial functional capacity may involve an impaired corticoid response. Persistent oxidative stress that arises from chronic low-grade inflammation is associated with mitochondria. Specifically, excessive glucocorticoid levels increase calcium capacity, mitochondrial membrane potential, and apoptotic state. A small number of human studies suggest that stressful social may be associated with mitochondria. For example, chronic stress due to caregiving for a family member with a chronic health condition was associated with lower mitochondrial respiratory capacity in blood cells. Childhood maltreatment was found to be associated with changes in mitochondrial concentration in blood cells related to ATP. New mothers who had a history of childhood maltreatment had alterations in production, and women with a more severe history had a worse mitochondrial bioenergetic profile in blood cells. While these studies provide initial evidence that mitochondrial function may serve as a salient mechanism linking life events in childhood or health, two critical gaps remain. First, the majority of studies conducted have used measures of mitochondrial function in whole blood. Thus, the relationship between adverse childhood events and tissue-specific measures of mitochondrial energetics obtained from skeletal muscle biopsies, the current gold standard, not known. Work in rodent models has demonstrated that early life stress altered mitochondrial and bioenergetics and central nervous system. These changes were associated with systemic effects on altered metabolic homeostasis and cognitive impairment. However, similar data in human peripheral tissues in response to stress are lacking. So we have the human data, okay, using, whatever people, but at least from what I'm gathering of what they're saying, the methodology that they use when it comes to assessing mitochondrial function in humans, or let's say tissue specific, they seem to rely on essentially, a blood test, as opposed to biopsy, basically getting a sample at the direct site, which is, if I remember correctly, what they do in this study. It's been a minute since I read it. But Okay, so there's that aspect in terms of like, even though we have studies in humans, the methodology that they use in humans doesn't seem to be, as they say, the current gold standard. But then we have non-human animal study, okay, where it's like, they might be using the appropriate methodology, but these are non-human animals. So in this study, however, similar to human, second, prior work in this area has been hampered by a small sample size. Was exclusively conducted in women or had minimal or no covariate adjustment. In this study, we leveraged data from the study of muscle mobility and examine how stressful life events in childhood may be associated with skeletal muscle mitochondrial function in later life. We extend prior studies by including in vivo and in vitro measures of mitochondrial energetics obtained from 31 phosphorus magnetic resonance spectroscopy and muscle biopsies in a large, well-characterized sample of older adults. We hypothesize that individuals who have experienced greater adverse life events in childhood would have worse mitochondrial bioenergetic profile muscle in older age, basically lower respiratory capacity, lower ATP. Basically, essentially, their ability to produce energy is inhibited, the bioenergetics. So, the results of the 879 participants in the study, 59% were women. The mean chronological age was 76.3 years, and 86% were self-reported as white. While about half of the sample had completed some college or obtained a college degree, only 32% of the respondents' parents college or among the 754 participants who had complete data on childhood adverse life events, LE, 53% reported experiencing one or more adverse events in childhood. Among those experiencing 3 or more events, 55 individuals reported 3 events, 29 participants reported 4 events, 25 participants reported 5 events, and 8 participants reported all 6. Individuals who reported experiencing stressful life events in childhood, on average, reported a greater number of depressives, C01. Oh, yeah. Baseline characteristics, not going to dissect, summarized in the text. Rather, it is summarized. So, results for women. Results for the overall sample. After adjusting for age, height, and gender, each additional childhood adverse life event was associated with a negative 0.1 standard deviation lower ATP max, 95% confidence interval. A statistically significant finding, adjusting for parental education and hypothesized confounder mediators, slightly attenuated the association and remains statistically significant, such that each additional adverse event was associated with a negative 0.08 standard deviation lower ATP max. Again, lower energy production. When examining effect modification by gender, the interaction term was not significant, ATP max, etc. Yes. Prices for women. For the overall sample. Now it's results for women. After adjusting for age and site, each additional adverse life event experienced before the age of 18 was associated with a negative 0.04 standard deviation lower ATP max, although the confidence interval included the null value and was not statistically significant. Results when adding parental education and further adjusting hypothesized confounder mediators did not change the overall association. Though these results were not statistically effect estimates, while small, were in the anticipated direction and inversely related to childhood adverse life events. And then results for men. Among men, each additional adverse life event experienced before the age of 18 was borderline associated with a negative 0.11 standard deviation lower ATP. there was no change in the effect estimate, which remains statistically significant in the inclusion of parental education. The effect estimate was slightly magnified when including participant education, smoking, physical activity, medication use, body mass index, and depressive symptoms, such that each additional adverse life event was associated with a negative 0.15 standard deviation lower max, which was statistically. Associations were not statistically. For the max oxidative phosphorylation measure for either women or men, our report 1 and supplementary 2. So, drink. Summarizing overall conclusion of the paper in the discussion. In this well-characterized set, older adults with gold standard measures of mitochondrial bioenergetics, we investigated whether adverse life events experienced before the age of 18 were associated with reduced skeletal muscle mitochondrial function in life. We found that in the overall sample, each additional adverse life event was associated with modestly lower ATP max, in vivo measure of maximal capacity for production. In gender-stratified models, significant associations between childhood adverse life events and ATP max were observed in men, but not in women. In contrast, no association was observed between childhood adverse life events and the ex vivo maximum oxidative phosphorylation capacity, either men or women. Few studies have explored whether stressful experiences in early life are associated with reduced mitochondrial function, recently recognized as a hallmark of aging and implicated in the development of a host of aging-related outcomes. Several studies have shown how stressful life events influence whole body phenomena such as allostatic load and inflammation. However, the biological processes by which these stressful social events experienced early in the life course may lead to impaired skeletal muscle mitochondrial bioenergetics have received, especially in the context of cohort studies with both ex vivo and in vivo measures of bioenergetic function. The results of our study offer preliminary evidence for the specific role that skeletal muscle mitochondria may play in how adverse events become biologically. While a small number of studies have examined how stressful experiences in early life in mitochondrial function, to date, much of this previous work has focused on alterations in content mitochondria. Right, and this is a little trivia fact about mitochondria. Like most people know, that in the nucleus of our cells, have our genomic information, all the blueprint, all that is necessary to pretty much make all the protein for all our cells, us as humans. But mitochondria themselves, which is an organelle inside the cell, also has its own DNA, called mitochondrial. No surprise. Because pretty much the current pretty much accepted hypothesis, maybe accepted theory now, is like pretty much mitochondria is a prokaryotic organism that we've essentially, we've through evolutionary time, we've established this symbiotic relationship. Pretty much, have, kind of like mini bacteria, so to speak, or like the remnants of bacteria inside our cell that are essential. That's what mitochondria are. They were like a whole separate other organism that we've essentially sort of assimilated and formed this symbiotic relationship. And that's why they have, DNA, like, have their own genetic information. So, for example, adults who have experienced maltreatment in childhood or lost a parent before age 18 had a significantly lower mitochondrial copy number compared to those with no adverse events in childhood. In close to 12,000 Chinese women with and without a history of major depression, childhood sexual abuse, shown to be associated with a greater mitochondrial DNA copy number obtained from saliva samples. In a study of 290 adults, after controlling for perceived stress, resilience, and depressive symptoms, anxiety, positive relationship, childhood adverse events, and the salivary mitochondrial DNA copy number remains statistical. In another study of 50 healthy middle-aged adults who were experimentally exposed to a psychological stressor, a public speaking simulation, a statistically significant rapid increase in serum circulating cell-free mitochondrial DNA was observed shortly after. Together, given that the mitochondrial DNA encodes proteins that influence cellular respiration and other bioenergetic properties, these results provide supporting evidence that core mitochondrial functions may be impaired in the face of social adversity, particularly events experienced early in the life course. We found that maximal ATP production, essentially, max energy production, in muscle was compromised among those who had experienced adverse life events in childhood, even after substantial adjustment. One possible explanation finding may lie in what Picard and McEwen defined as a mitochondrial allostatic load, a phenomenon in which mitochondria respond to stressors that are chronic or specifically. Mitochondrial allostatic load has been described as a multifactorial dynamic process by which mitochondria exhibit increased respiratory enzymatic activity or mitochondrial membrane potential, which may lead to reduced production. This physiologic response is consistent with our finding that ATP max, a measure of maximal energy production, was lower among those who had experienced greater adverse events in childhood. Lower skeletal muscle mitochondrial energetics declines with age and is associated with reduced muscle performance, mobility, and frailty in adults. Therefore, the association of lower ATP max with childhood adverse life events observed in suggests that these early life stressors may contribute to reduced health and quality of life in adults. We investigated whether the relationship between childhood adverse life events and mitochondrial function differed by gender. While we did not find evidence of statistical interaction, we found in gender stratified models that among men, each additional adverse life event in childhood was associated with lower ATP. Although few studies have investigated whether there are gender differences in mitochondrial function in humans, a small body of evidence suggests that sex hormones may shape skeletal muscle metabolism, which may also influence fiber type composition, size, and capillary density. Therefore, it is possible that the inability to founding variables may in part explain why we observe different results. An alternative reason difference may be driven by different reporting. Prior research indicates that while women are more likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, men are more likely to report exposure to traumatic events. One expected finding was the lack of an observed association between max oxidative phosphorylation measure and childhood adverse life events. There are several potential explanations. First, while experiencing stress may be related to a reduced capacity to generate ATP, this may occur without impairment through electrons, as assessed by respirometry. Specifically, ATP max is an integrated measure that calculates production, while the ex vivo max oxidative phosphorylation measure oxygen consumption as a proxy. If there is reduced coupling of oxygen consumption, ATP, lower ratio phosphate to then it could manifest in lower ATP max without ex vivo max oxidative phosphorylation measure. Changes in intracellular calcium cycling is another factor beyond respiratory chain capacity that could limit ATP max, but would not influence assays mitochondria. Thus, the respiration assay used to determine max oxidative concentration uses oxygen and substrate concentrations that are standardized and saturating. where there is no calcium cycling, represents a fundamentally different assay, max assay. Last, it is possible that measurement error may have been introduced. So, if I'm understanding it correctly, which I may very well not be, my area of expertise, not studying mitochondrial function. But so they have one of the ways that they assess mitochondrial function, sort of that gold standard way, that I think we're going to briefly touch upon, get to the methodology. Touch here. Where does the is exactly do outcomes? Yes, measure skeletal muscle. So yeah, they have leave understanding it correctly. They essentially measure breathing. We breathe in and out to live and survive, because like we need the oxygen, because multiple roles of oxygen, but one of the primary important ones is like it's a critical component of our energy production, of like through ATP production in mitochondria, oxygen plays that critical role, pretty much like one of the final steps or close to the steps. And so it's like a sort of a surrogate metric, okay, of assessing mitochondrial function is like, I think as they say, respirometry, like through assessment how you're using oxygen, or not using oxygen optimally. But I think based off what they're saying, they don't really seem to find differences sort of at the breathing level, when it comes to an indirect marker of mitochondrial function. But gold standard way used as mitochondrial function is like through muscle biopsy. I think they described at some point. Yeah. So pretty much collect the specimen from the middle region of the musculus vastus lateralis. Go in and obtain a muscle biopsy, and then assess the mitochondria, the mitochondrial function, muscle biopsy, and that's where I believe find the differences. But when it comes to like pretty much breathing level, indirect measure of mitochondria, they don't seem to find much of a difference. Let's see. Here, yeah, this study has had several strengths. First, we used a well-characterized sample of older adults that contained both in vivo and ex vivo measures of mitochondrial function across a large number of participants. To the best of our knowledge, no studies have obtained gold standard measures of mitochondrial function in a sample of this. Second, we were able to use life course data, that is parental educational and adverse events experienced in childhood. The merging of gold standard mitochondrial bioenergetic measures, highly valid and well-regarded measures, environment often does not exist for participants. Therefore, by leveraging this unique intersection of data, we were able to link adverse life events in childhood, a well-established social exposure, to biologically specific measures of aging. Last, this study represents an important step forward in our understanding of how mitochondrial function, and specifically ATP production, measured in tissue with high relevance cardiometabolic health, physical function, may be implicated in compromised health among older adults later in the life course. Our study results provide initial mechanistic evidence for how early social stress may influence physical functioning in life, although future studies are needed to corroborate these findings. Despite these strengths, this study has several limitations. First, we acknowledge the cross-sectional data which limits our ability to disentangle temporal ordering of mediators on the causal pathway. In future studies, we hope to leverage longitudinal data, recent addition to the study, parse the contribution of intervening factors that link childhood stress to adult health. For example, we note that we do not have retrospective measures on physical activity to assess the potential contribution of physical activity that occurred earlier in the life course. Second, an additional limitation of the retrospective assessment of our primary childhood adverse life events and the length of time between childhood adverse life events and the assessment of mitochondria. Right. As they mentioned, okay, even though they have a fairly large sample size, at least compared to other studies, the average age of the sample that they were studying was an older population. Average age was like 76 age, if I remember. Yeah. Mean chronological age, 76 years. So given the fact, okay, that they have a high average age of participants, and they're essentially using or they're relying on the individuals to recall their adverse childhood life event. And they might not be remembering correctly, might not be giving the picture, and average age of 76.3 years of age, they're asking them to remember back into childhood to report on their childhood adverse life events. And so might be participants' memory may be subject to recall bias if events that occurred earlier in life were more difficult to recall. However, previous research suggests that individuals recall the timing of past traumatic events with reasonable accuracy. Third, we treated each adverse event with equal weight and did not know the precise timing in which events occurred. Age 8 versus 8. Thus, we are unable to fully quantify the magnitude and severity of these adverse events across participants. Future work should pinpoint the duration, timing, and severity of the experience. Fourth, our sample was predominantly non-Hispanic, white, and highly educated, limiting the generalizability. We note that since we used a modified version of the Adverse Life Events Questionnaire, generalizing our findings to other studies may pose challenges. Fifth, we acknowledge the potential for confounding, as we do not have data on the period between childhood and older age to indirect pathways by which adverse life events have influenced mitochondria. Sixth, it is possible our estimates reflect overadjustment. Several of the covariates included in our models, while potential confounders, could plausibly be hypothesized as mediators, that is, education. However, even with the inability to assess the contribution of other variables on the causal pathway and the potential adjustment, we nonetheless observed an association between childhood adverse life events and essentially maximal energy. Our findings serve as a springboard for studies to investigate how social stress experienced in life course influenced mitochondrial function in life and the mechanistic basis of mitochondrial function, ideally larger sample. There is growing interest in understanding the social determinants of mitochondrial function of adults. While few studies have investigated the role of early life social stress and mitochondria, almost no prior work has evaluated how adverse life events experienced in childhood influence mitochondrial function in large samples of adults. Therefore, this study is an important contribution to literature because it assesses the relationship between childhood adverse life events and mitochondrial function with high relevance for cardiometabolic health and physical function among older adults. Our results suggest that adverse social stress experienced during childhood may be implicated in reproduction, particularly among men. So again, they are not saying anything about the childhood adverse life events actually causing, the mitochondrial function or impaired function observing. Even though they're heavily implicating it, as they say, but really there's a strong suggestion, much more research is totally possible that sort of like coincidence, those more likely who's experiencing childhood adverse life events just for whatever reason through other mechanisms have impaired mitochondrial function. But this results as it so pretty strongly suggest heavy implication that potentially childhood adverse life events are maybe playing a causal role impairment. Totally way more research established that actual causal. Future work should examine these findings in the context of other relevant biological pathways, including but limited to inflammation, cell senescence, and mitochondrial, and to what extent other mediating factors may also play a role in among older adults. So yeah, pretty, my opinion, pretty cool. And somewhat straight what they're actually doing. Actually complex. But at some surface level, seems simple. Taking a group of people and getting them to recall their childhood and reporting on their childhood adverse life events, and then assessing mitochondrial function. But actually assessing mitochondrial function, taking the biopsies, and doing all this analysis, it's actually a pretty challenging. Yeah, and that's why a whole host of over a dozen, yeah, at least a dozen, if not more, research involved in it, because it is actually quite complex, difficult to carry out, or at least difficult to carry out in a rigorous and high quality fashion. There's a reason why. There's likely a reason why. Published in Science and a high impact and well respected journal. But yeah, methodology. Okay. I might, or almost certainly, I don't think they assessed. But yeah, they definitely did, totally did that muscle biopsy. Test mitochondria. And I think overall main methodology. So I think I covered everything I wanted. I do have more. Cover growing issues science, and people pursue science. In terms of this issue, pretty much less and less people pursuing a postdoc. Understandable, at least in my opinion, given how postdocs are treated. Let's say mistreated, in my opinion. In that the reward of doing postdoc, very limited reward, not really, at least growing number of people that are completing. There appears to be growing migration into industry and away from academia. I think it's totally understandable given the state of academia. But I think this and yeah, also other sort of let's growing issue science that I want to cover. Okay, next time But yeah, since I covered everything that I want to cover, I am going to end the stream here. I'm gonna see if I can find someone to raid. Moment. But in the meantime, I want to thank everyone that passed by. Bob Marley, always a pleasure, super appreciated. And Ariella Studies, shout out to you. And not following Ariella Studies. You absolutely should. Again, they're pursuing their MD, PhD, and they do both art studies, art streams, and streams from their lab. You can pretty much watch them do science in time. And also thank you, Time Scroll, for passing by and sending that article. Rather, I'm going to do my best to see if I can cover it. And then Noda Bud, thank you for passing by. Appreciated. Nerduino, raid out. Another science. But yeah, that's it for today. I'm going to try and be back during the week. I'm trying to stream more than once per week. If you want to join the Discord and receive updates when I'm streaming next, it's probably going to be on like Wednesday or a Thursday. But yeah, they're going to raid out to Nerdino. And yeah, thank you everyone for passing by. Ariella Studies, Marley, Bud, anybody else that I forgot, I apologize. But yeah, give a warm welcome to Nerdino. If you're not following them, you absolutely should be. They cover astronomy content, and I believe space launch content. And until next time, take care and be well.
Let's get some shoutouts going as well. We the lovely and amazing science streams, of course, because science was all